Man, I had no idea how divided the opinions were on Project 8. I heard everything from the greatest praise to the worst disappointment and everything in between. Everybody has a different opinion and a different story. How you found it, whether or not it was your first game in the series or just your first game generally, things you specifically thought were innovative or things you thought were total garbage. A lot of it makes me think deeper about my own opinions. If this is your first time here, welcome. But if you've been here a while, thank you for sticking around. Today, we're going to take a look at 4 versions of Tony Hawk's Proving Ground. It took a while to get here, but we got here eventually. Let's get started. Tony Hawk's Proving Ground, developed by Neversoft in 2007, is the series' swan song. This was the last game developed by Neversoft, and it came out less than 1 month after Skate 1. So if you see a similarity, it's pretty much impossible for anything to be copied. It would be damn near impossible to change or add anything meaningful in that time. After this, we saw the releases of games like Tony Hawk Ride, Shred, Pro Skater HD, and Pro Skater 5. Needless to say, the series took a massive nosedive after the end of the Neversoft era, but this game particularly is one that I only hear people talk about when they dislike it. Like I said in my last video, a lot of longtime players quit because of Project 8. Really, the only people who even touched Proving Ground were the super dedicated Tony Hawk fans and the people who really liked what Project 8 did. But even still, more people I've spoken to have played the PS2 version of this game, and the others go pretty much ignored for the most part. When I was a kid, Proving Ground was like a legend to me. I kept seeing the name pop up in cheat code books that I bought at Scholastic book fairs, but I actually didn't play Proving Ground until 2014. I had the great misfortune of playing the PS2 port first, and that was a pretty sour experience even for the time. I didn't get around to playing the PS3 version until just this last year, and honestly, I can't believe I waited so long to get to it. First, the story. You take on the role of you, quite literally. You are a local skater from Philadelphia, and a bunch of pros are hanging out putting on demos around the city. You're out skating with a few of your friends when conveniently a few local pros take notice of your skating. They offer to teach you a few things, and then the story branches off into 3 different careers. After impressing each of the pros, you introduce yourself to Tony Hawk, who teaches you a few more things and tells you that if you work hard at it, you might hit it big. Then you're sent off into the city to start putting work into your skating. This game has excellent writing. If you didn't know, this game was written by Eli Morgan Gessner, and if you don't know who that is, let me give you some history. Eli Gessner is one of the co-founders of Fat Farm, Zoo York, and Shut Skateboards. Aside from his very interesting business and indie film career, Gessner is also the guy who built the first skateboard mini-ramp in New York City at his own nightclub. He also is a graphic designer, and you've probably worn clothes or skated aboard with a Gessner design at some point. The dude is legendary and rooted in skateboarding. You can hear it in the dialogue and see it throughout the story. Much of it is directed right at the player without ever breaking the fourth wall, and that works because you are the skater. There are really awesome moments here, like chasing Bam when he steals your wallet, or the producer telling you to ruin Bam's show and paying you for it, or everybody calling out Eric at the Lansdowne competition, or the guy stealing your trophy at the FDR competition. Man, people are constantly ripping you off in this game, and that's kind of the theme of it. While you're out pioneering and being a crazy good skater, other people are kind of taking your ideas and building off of you. You're cementing as a legend, and that's what the story is about, right? It's about you. Mixed in are a bunch of good jokes, great character chemistry, references to old skate magazines and videos, a few genuinely great pieces of motivational advice. Man, Gessner nailed it, dude. You can really tell the difference between somebody who loves skating and the corpo career teen movie garbage that we got from Rob Hammersley. First, we'll do the PS3 version. The career here is, again, completely different than everything we've seen so far. The idea is similar to Project 8, complete goals to open new parts of the world. This time, there is no big contest or ranking system. Instead, Proving Ground splits off into 3 completely different careers. Each of them offers a different variety of goals based on the career, hardcore, and rigor mechanics that I'll talk about in a few minutes. They also branch off into completely different stories that focus on individual pro skaters, and you can do many of these things in any order that you want. Before anything else, you have to do 1 tutorial mission for each character to introduce yourself to one of the new mechanics. I don't hate this, and I'll tell you why. Yes, each of the new mechanics is temporarily locked until you do one of those first tutorial goals, but before you do any of that, every single regular mechanic is available to mess around with. You can do every trick, all of the flatland, and everything else you would already expect from every other Tony Hawk game. Even more forgivable, these tutorial goals are right at the beginning of every single storyline. They are the first things you do, and they go by incredibly fast. This game does a lot to stay beginner friendly, and it does it in a way that respects the players that may have been playing for a long time already. You can still choose to play a tutorial for all of the regular mechanics as well if you're completely new and you've never played one of these games before. After you've done the tutorial goals for each new mechanic, Tony will teach you about some of the other goals around the world. First are skill challenges, and I want to apologize because I incorrectly called those line challenges in my last video. These are a returning goal from Project 8, and it is cool to see them here. There are even a few new ones. Next are the actual line challenges. The idea is to skate on the first object and then combo each subsequent highlighted object for as long as you can within the time limit. These are excellent for learning some of the bigger lines around the city, and getting higher rankings on them really does mean hitting a very big line. Next is photo challenges. These will have you perform a trick over a spot or an object, and during that trick you have to click the stick to take a photo. This is really cool, and you can save your photos to look at later, which is neat. You know, you don't see many things like this in games. Next is video goals. These will have you hit a score requirement with a combo using one or two objects, and when you're done you can instantly watch the video back and save it. All of this photo and video stuff puts a big emphasis on the player-focused story. This game is about you, and the game wants you to know that. Even the customization at the beginning is better. There's so much more instantly available to you, and you can buy more stuff with cash that you pick up around the world than you earn by completing goals, and you can earn more stuff just by completing goals and achieving milestones. This game embraces the same spirit that Underground 1 pushed so hard for. It's about you and your experience above everything else. Classic mode also makes a return, and it's also integrated into the career mode, but now instead of an NPC, you start classic mode by interacting with one of these arcade cabinets littered around the world. You also have to use these to start high score runs. The size and scope of this game really comes into perspective when you see the size of the world map. It's honestly very huge. 3 of Project 8's map in 1. A commenter a while back told me it would be cool to just skate around THPS style in a GTA-sized map. Bro, this is it. This is literally the exact game you're looking for. It's massive, and when you consider all of the rooftops and hidden spots in the subway and the doors to Big Air, it gets even bigger. Project 8 was alright. The open world was cool. It was small, but it was cool. This is damn impressive. I had no clue how much I wanted it. The gameplay here is solid, exceptional in a lot of ways. Proving Ground fixes many of the broken things about Project 8 while keeping a lot of the great things intact. You probably already noticed the first major difference: the camera. This game actually offers a few different camera choices, including classic, and that instantly makes the experience a lot better. Classic camera is the way to go. Next, the flip and roll system has been fine-tuned and fixed into something a lot more comfortable, and not many of the collision problems and physics bugs exist anymore. Scattered around the world you'll find cash that you can use to buy new clothes, decks, and other stuff. The slam mechanic is gone. Good riddance. Wall running and wall jumping are also gone. Instead, there's a completely new omnidirectional climbing system. You can upgrade that to be faster, and you can climb on poles. There are also some great quality of life improvements. Wall plant works better, and the distance of it feels right. Flatland spins are a little more loose, but the time to prepare them is still longer, so it's easier to hyperspin than Project 8, but harder than most of the other games. Pole bonks are back, and Nada spins are returned to their original form. Late ollies, where you ollie late after falling from a rail or a ledge or a wall plant, have had their windows loosened into something a lot more comfortable and usable. Nail the trick makes a return. It's been cleaned up a lot, and now there are a few different variations. You can nail manuals, and you can throw grabs into nail the trick to spice things up even more. And then there's my favorite new mechanic: aggro kick and aggro wall push. See, you move at full speed all the time. That really isn't a problem here. Just like in Project 8, you can set your speed in the options menu, and it feels comfortable most of the time. But aggro kick is a tool you use if you really want to hit a ridiculous speed to get crazy air. This is mostly used for airing over huge gaps and stuff, but isn't that really what makes it so good? With this addition, you can now hit gaps that never would have been possible before. It really does add a lot of new depth to the gameplay. You can upgrade it to loosen the window for perfect kicks and to make it count for points. You can also aggro push during manuals if you're against the wall, and that'll keep you going even faster. There's also a new skate checking mechanic that you can use to defend yourself from the local thugs. On top of this, you can now tap select to just build park pieces wherever the hell you want. There's also the mod tool, which gives you some creative freedom to modify pre-existing pieces of the city. This is an entirely different kind of creative freedom. You can now create entirely new lines on the fly anywhere out of many different things. That makes the already giant city feel even bigger. A fully customizable skater, you, doing a completely unique trick that you are creating in real time in the nail system over a bunch of objects that you put down. Do you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like freedom. This game has has more freedom than any other game in the entire series. The spirit of the whole thing is just embracing you, yourself, doing things the way you want to do them. I love it. There's nothing bad I can say. I didn't have any major collision bugs. All of the familiar mechanics work. All of the new ideas are fantastic. Everything has been cleaned up. The performance is so much better. I can't even really describe how good this game feels to play. Comments on my last video pointed out that the Xbox 360 version of Project 8 was better, and that's true, and it's pretty safe to assume that that's also the case with this game, but it doesn't even really matter. The game itself is just optimized so much better, which is typical for sequels to games built in new engines. On top of this, there's an entirely new bowl skating system with a new carve mechanic and some new specialized grinds with switch-ups. Pretty much all of the new stuff can be upgraded with points that you collect by completing goals, and there are 9 upgradable things in total. As far as regular stats, this keeps the system from Project 8, and I really like that. Just skating around and playing more will upgrade your stats. It's real-time progression, and it works really well. This whole game works really well. I don't think I can understate it. And I didn't even tell you everything. I'll leave a few surprises. There's more to discover here. There's more than meets the eye to what you might be seeing. Visually, Proving Ground is sort of a victim of the time period. Games as a whole were entering the age of dismal gray, but honestly, the more I looked at it, the more I started to appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, I love the bright colors and the heavy contrast. It adds a lot of visibility to the scene, but Proving Ground takes place in Pennsylvania and Maryland. About halfway through the game, it hit me. This game has alternating weather cycles. One minute it'll be bright and sunny and things will look beautiful, and the next it'll be dim and covered in clouds. They're actually capturing the authenticity of the real areas. The East Coast has some of the craziest rain in the country, and this tiny visual detail is a charming and accurate representation of that. The skater models all look great, and the custom skater options are so much better this time. There are actually a lot of options that look incredibly similar to 1+2, but with even more and better physics for a lot of it. All of the pro models look fine, the motion capture looks good, and the trick animations are fluid and clean, mostly. This game is damn beautiful for the time. Underneath all of that is the world map. I already said it's 3 times bigger than Project 8, and the actual objects and concentration are so much better and skatable, and it all feels great. They optimized that misuse of the empty world space. There are no empty world spaces anymore. Even better, there are more ways to skate between each area. There are shortcuts between every place from one place to the other, and you can combo around in so many crazy ways. This game has some of the best freedom, and the rest of the game emphasizes that a lot. It stands up well today. You could cover this in anti-aliasing and bloom, and it would be easy to mistake it for a modern game released right now. There is one weird visual quirk though. In an effort to emphasize the fun of the gameplay, a lot of the animations are cancelable. That definitely makes some of the skating look more awkward than it should, but I would rather have fun animation over limited input delay, you know? It brings it so much closer to the rest of the games in the series. The soundtrack is honestly top quality. It's just as big as Project 8, and the theme is still stuff a skater might listen to, but now it's mostly old school and underground stuff. There are a couple of mainstream songs mixed in, but the majority of it is old school hip-hop, funk, reggae, and metal. You've probably heard me use the song Gift Tax by Future Pigeon a couple of times now. There's also a new variety of punk and other stuff, but it's smaller varieties spread out over a bunch of different stuff. It's not a high concentration of one thing. Bigger than the previous games, substantially, and thematically, a lot of it makes a lot of sense. Philadelphia is well known for being a place loaded with rappers and beat makers. Same thing with Baltimore. Same thing with DC. This is probably the one time in the series where the soundtrack theme emphasizes the setting, along with emphasizing the skaters. It's way up there. This is in my top 5 easily. The last thing I want to talk about is the real world skate footage. It's fucking everywhere. Did you just meet a pro? Have some footage. Did you just get told about an old video? Here, take this footage. Did you just nail another sponsor, or did you reach an in-game milestone? Congratulations. Take some more footage. I love this. It's such a high concentration that you're guaranteed to see at least some of it, and it really emphasizes what makes all of this so important. There's more to life. You don't have to sit around playing video games because there is a real world out there, and you could be really skating in that world. You could be really skating in that world. Video games offer a great way to live out some of your fantasies. This one specifically emphasizes that a lot, but it is just a fantasy, and you're out here in the real world, so go make use of that real world. With all of that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give Proving Ground for the PS3 a rating of 10 out of 10. I know that might be confusing to some people. Nope, not everybody's gonna agree with me on that. You know, it might be a generational difference or something. It's always a taste difference. Some of you genuinely don't like this game, and you've made mention of that, but for me, this is the Underground sequel I always wanted. Eli Gessner was a way better writer than Rob Hammersley for this particular kind of game because he is actually passionate about skateboarding. Literally all of my problems with Project 8 were fixed here, and all of the stuff I liked is still there. There's also still so much new stuff to do, and I thought I had seen everything. Beyond that, this game gets a 10 out of 10 because it is the only game like it. Not the only game in the series like it, not the only game of the time period like it. This is quite literally the only game of its kind, and it is really a masterpiece. It's like all of those exceptional Tony Hawk games from the earlier years, but with more modern technology and ideas. Compared to Underground 2, it's more about the skateboarding, and compared to American Wasteland, it's the same attitude with more of a real purpose and a closer, more down-to-earth setting and placement. It's the spirit of skateboarding, complete with freedom and creativity. Plus, it's all even more worth it to humiliate that fuckface Eric Sparrow one more time. I love this game, and I recommend giving it a shot if you never have. The people who don't like it aren't going to like it more just because I had a good time with it, but if you've never played this version of this game, then you seriously missed out on one of the best games just ever. I'm sad that I didn't play it for so many years, but I'm glad that I finally have. Particularly if you're a fan of Project 8, and you wanted more of that, but you didn't play this game. Or if you're like me, where you thought Project 8 was good and just needed to be better, then definitely check this out, it's great. Next up, the PS2 version, developed by Page 44. If you saw my last video, then you'll recognize them as the developer for the PSP port of Project 8. Whether you like that game or not is irrelevant right now. It's compressed down a little bit, but at least it's faithful enough to the Shaba Games version of that game. You know, so that it is what it is. But, I mean, this is just bad. To everybody who wanted to know what I thought about the classic mode in the Project 8 PSP port, I'm really sorry I didn't talk about that. Since it wasn't mixed into the career, I didn't even know it was missing. It just kind of flew over my head a little bit. And if I'm gonna be totally real, the controls were way too frustrating. I didn't even want to fuck with going back to it. I'm overall not excited about this. I had a copy of this version of this game in 2014, and if my memory serves me well, this is a real shit show. The career here is the standard Tony Hawk formula. Go from map to map, completing goals to move on. Okay, I was nice about this before with Project 8. It was a step backward, and it hurt some of the charm. But that was the first time that step backward had been taken, and Shaba put a lot of effort into those maps to make them better. This is one game later, and this time it's just Page 44 being lazy. The models are all direct imports of the PlayStation 3 stuff, but cut down and closed off at the edges. The PlayStation 2 had open world games. The GTA games were all open world. Most, if not all, of the Need for Speed games, plus Need for Speed Undercover, which was also a next-gen game, was open world. Morrowind wasn't on the PS2, it was on the Xbox and Windows, but that game had open worlds in 2002. I refuse to believe that it was somehow impossible to make these maps bigger than they were. I know enough about game development to know that yes, it was absolutely possible to make this bigger. It's also inefficient and stupid. All they did was make their own job harder by cutting everything apart and redesigning no part of the maps. They just got rid of stuff and then closed some other stuff off with objects from other places to kind of like fiddle together things that might have worked. In doing this, they butchered a lot of the goals, took out some of the best story moments, and honestly, 80% of the best dialogue was cut. The PS2 was so much more capable than this. Classic mode also makes a return. I'm glad they didn't mess with this. You still activate Classic by interacting with an arcade cabinet somewhere in each map. Once it was already fused into the career mode, taking it out of the career mode was a step in the wrong direction. I don't know why Page 44 did that with Project 8 on the PSP, really. I'm racking my brain to figure out why the hell they did that or what they were thinking. What was all of the extra effort for? Same question here. Open world games are a very old idea. Why go through all of the trouble of separating and rebuilding each map when just cutting the draw distance and adding fog would have made the world even more playable. Morrowind had a very interesting world cell system that would cut each section into individual cells around the map, and the closer you got to each cell, the more of it was drawn and the more behind you was culled. That would have been a much more simple solution than completely rebuilding every individual district of the game to fit within a map structure. There are way too many of them. It would have taken 1/3 of the time, and the rest of the available time could have gone toward polishing the game itself. Page 44 went under in 2011, and I totally understand why. They were just really inefficient. They were probably costing more money than they were worth, and the results speak for themselves. They were not a game development studio. They were a game development assistance studio. They would get hired to provide small amounts of assistance to other actual studios, and every time they were given their own game to work on, they completely shit the bed. Proving Ground is no exception to that. They took a masterpiece and disrespectfully tore it to shreds. The gameplay here, to put it delicately, is a heaping pile of horse manure spread over the length of a tar pit. The engine is the Project 8 version of the American Wasteland engine, but they somehow made it even worse at a technical level. This game is Bug City. The only real comparison I can draw is BMX XXX, but if I'm being completely honest, I think even that is a better made game than this. BMX XXX had a few bugs, and the maps weren't very well made, and the game itself was dry, but the gameplay itself was completely playable and not even really that bad when it worked. I don't even know if I would call this playable. In the comments of my last video, somebody pointed out that the caveman meter for Project 8 was completely broken. Even when it was on screen, it would cancel your combo anyway. Turns out, that's true. So to page 44's credit, they did fix the caveman meter here, but that's the only thing they fixed. The flip and roll system has been completely destroyed by adding rolls back in and changing the speed. It not only looks awkward and uncomfortable, but I am almost positive the player hitbox moves faster than the character model. Some landings just do not make sense. There are also a wide variety of collision bugs all over the place. Snag a vertex on a rail? Bail. Hit a lip on a ramp? Bail. But some things you can just totally phase through, no problem, and those are everywhere. To make it even worse, gravity is completely fucked. Playing this is like playing any other game in the series with half moon gravity enabled all the time, and that gets made even worse by the broken aggro kick system. The aggro kick in Project 8 on PS2 was fine, but page 44 tried to port over the PS3 version of aggro kick. Because of how different the physics are in these games, the aggro kick here sends you flying way faster, higher, and farther than you should. Just to complete the goal where you learn aggro kick in the first place, you pretty much have to bank drop, or you'll just fly straight over the landing zone. Nail the manual is gone, and Nail the Grab has been completely destroyed by bad design. Mod spots are gone. Wall plan has been nerfed pretty heavily. Climbing is there, but there's also a double jump and all of it feels much worse to use. Proving Ground on the PS3 and Xbox 360 had a very unique bowl skating system that added more realism without cutting down any of the stuff you could already do. This port doesn't have that system despite being totally capable of it, and page 44 porting over a bunch of other shit from the PS3. Many great pieces of each area are gone or missing because each map was rebuilt individually, and the pieces that come back are all mostly broken because they just randomly deleted some polygons in some places to make the game run a little better. That's another very shitty thing about all of this. Despite the weird attempts to make this game runs better, it actually runs very poorly. The frame rate itself is terrible, 14 frames a second at its worst. The maps are tiny and still run like shit. There's also animation input delay that makes it even more uncomfortable. The frame rate alone makes much of this game feel unplayable, but mixed in with the bad object collision and the broken physics, much of it actually is very unplayable. Even the goals don't work and register correctly half of the time. That's sad because buried underneath all of this, all of these problems, is just another Tony Hawk game. It was just treated poorly by its development team. Visually, this port looks really bad. All of the assets are taken directly from the PS3 port, so that means things that should have physics don't, and they look awkward and stiff. There are also no normal maps, so they all have extremely flat textures with no depth or anything. There's also no lighting. This game is one solid brightness everywhere, all the time. Overall, there are pretty much none of the post-processing effects from the previous games. All of the shitty asset compression is done to make the game run better, and it doesn't. The map draw distance is also full. You can see all of whatever map you're playing, but the character and marker animation draw distance is god-awful. If you're even a little bit away from an NPC, their animations play at 6 frames a second, and if you get further away from that, they disappear. Goal markers just totally freeze altogether. So let me get this straight. Page 44 could figure out how to edit the proximity cells for the LOD, but they couldn't figure out how to do it for the open world? No, I refuse to believe that. These maps just do not feel good to play because of how poorly put together they are, and they're only poorly put together because one system that is proven to work wasn't implemented because Page 44 couldn't put in any effort toward building better maps with better optimization. They just cut every single district apart and closed all the edges. The reality here is that Page 44 wanted to prove that they could put their own spin on it without anybody else's help. That didn't work. It's sad, it's lame, and they failed to produce. Every time one of the pre-rendered cutscenes from the PS3 version was playing, I thought about every single bad decision at once. I couldn't help it. This is really just a bad version of a good game. It's like playing the Android port of Resident Evil 4 compared to Resident Evil 4 the remake. The leap is so massive that it is really painful. To make it worse, even the cutscenes have been cut down or moved or changed. All of them are now shot in first-person perspective, so you can't see your own skater at any time during any of them. And a lot of them forgot to cut out the player character's legs in some spots or get rid of visual effects. The majority of great jokes and dialogue is gone. The context is gone for so much of it. They cut out so much dialogue, and it wasn't even to save on disk space. This game is fucking small compared to other games in the series. They just lazily forgot and missed a bunch of it. And compared to other PS2 games, this is tiny. It's so fucking bland and lame. Page 44 not only disrespected Neversoft, but they disrespected Eli Gessner by getting rid of the best parts of his writing. They disrespected the pros by getting rid of the best parts of their dialogue and their footage. They disrespected the players by throwing together a terrible version of a long-running series. It's pretty unforgivable as far as things go. This is a cheap bootleg of a genuinely amazing game. Respectfully, Page 44 sucked as a studio, and their dissolution was well-deserved. They should have stuck to licensed shovelware and development assistance, because this was horrendous. With all that said, I'll give Proving Ground on the PS2 a rating of 4 out of 10. I don't think it's nearly as bad as Pro Skater HD from 2012, but it's definitely one of the worst entries in the series. I cannot forgive the wild variety of stupid decisions from the development team. They took a game that was masterful and beautifully crafted, and they shit all over it. What makes that even more unforgivable is that they did it using an engine that 8 previous games had already been developed in just fine, and they still somehow managed to make it worse. Most of the work was already done for them. Fixing a single bug doesn't help the fact that this game has worse performance and more bugs than BMX XXX. The PS2 port of Downhill Jam was better than this, and that was a severely cut down port of a racing spin-off made for the Wii. What the fuck happened here? But just wait, it gets even worse. Next is the Wii port, also developed by Page 44. It's pretty much the exact same as the PS2 port, so I'll skip most of it. But now, instead of using the regular comfortable Tony Hawk controls to play this janky mess, you are now forced to use the Wii motion controls. I'm gonna be totally real. I don't have a Wii anymore, and I don't have a motion controller, so I emulated the experience in a gamepad by mapping the sticks and buttons to certain motions, and believe it or not, that was actually a better experience than actually playing this game with the regular motion controls. This port specifically is outright unresponsive. Many of the things it asks you to do simply do not work. Page 44 had no clue how to develop a Tony Hawk game, even more so they had no clue how to develop a Wii game. The classic controller launched at the exact same time as this. They could have worked with Nintendo to integrate that into the gameplay. That would have been solid. That would have sold more classic controllers, and by extension, this port would be equal to the PS2. But instead, it's restricted to use those motion controls, and that kills it. The Wii port gets a 3 out of 10, because now it actually is as bad as Pro Skater HD. Arguably worse in a lot of ways. It gets the same rating because it does have more features than that, and it's bigger, but this time it's pretty much the bottom of the barrel. It's amazing that I've never seen this on a worst of all time list, because it deserves to be there. Okay, this is the home stretch. Proving Ground for the DS, developed by Vicarious Visions, is a very faithful remake of the PS3 game built using the engine from American Skateland. If you want to know more about about the overall gameplay, go watch the American Skateland portion of my American Wasteland review. I'm already at the end of 8 pages, and I really don't want this video to be a whole hour long, so I'm only going to talk about what this game does differently. Before the game though, I want to point out that this is another game where Leo Zuniga was the lead designer. He really did an amazing job with Skateland and 1+2, so just knowing this was his work instantly makes me feel pretty good about it. We're gonna change things up and talk about the real skateboarding footage first. Honestly, I'm stunned that this game has real footage at all. These DS cartridges are small, only up to 512 megabytes at maximum, and the game actually doesn't suffer much for it being there. It's compressed to hell, but it's watchable, and there's a lot more of it used correctly here than in the PS2 and Wii ports. This is a DS game. Real skaters were probably playing this game on their break or something, so it doesn't need to be there, but it's there anyway, and I appreciate that. Remember to go out and just skate once in a while. The career here is similar to the PS2 port and the rest of the series. Go from map to map, completing goals to move on. But the big difference between these games is that this is a DS game. Cutting the world down into individual levels actually makes sense here because the DS hardware absolutely could not have handled the open world. And also, Vicarious Visions cut the maps down and redesigned them in such a way that they were far more comfortable and more compelling to play. The PS2 port really doesn't have an excuse. The PS2 was more than capable of open world games, and even if they were going to do it map by map, the way they did it just did not work. The goals here are also a little bit different than that version. Instead of starting out in the Philly neighborhood, you instead begin in your personal warehouse skate park. Tony Hawk and a few pros teach you a few of the basics similar to other ports, and that leaves the rest of the maps open entirely for goals. So by the time you actually get to playing the game, the tutorial is over. Vicarious Visions took some creative liberties here, and I don't think they're bad decisions because it honestly just makes the most sense with the DS hardware. Classic mode also makes a return, and like the PSP port of Project 8, it was also cut out of the career mode, but this time I was looking for it specifically to talk about it. Honestly, there isn't much to see there. It's all of the career maps with no new additions and all of the classic goals in place, and it's really fun to play. But it doesn't overshadow the career or anything like that with new maps or anything. I like it, but I still have no fucking idea why it's there. Next, the gameplay. It's very identical to American Skateland. Like, extremely identical. I'm telling you, if you want to know more about it, go watch the portion of the review I did in American Wasteland. It's all, I mentioned that already. There are some differences. First, the level out has finally been fixed. The days of leveling out just a little too far away, that jank of Pro Skater 4 on the PS1, is gone. It's more comfortable now. Next, Nail the Trick is unfortunately done much differently, but in its place, Vicarious Visions developed the gesture trick system. This game used pen gestures a whole year before Skate It for the DS, and it's a different kind of system. It's honestly genuinely awesome. It's amazing to see how much real innovation was happening so late in the series. Since this is built on American Skateland, the Burt Slide also makes a complete return. They didn't have to keep that. A bunch of other games got rid of it or changed it into the Switch Power Slide, but it's a really great nod to old school skateboarding. So it's good that it was at least used for more than one game. The rig stuff is also completely gone. The PS2 port tried to include it as a severely stripped down version with the mod tool for city pieces removed, and I think it's sad that it doesn't exist here, but it also doesn't make a lot of sense to have it on the DS hardware. This is another thing that would have been extremely difficult to pull off at a technical level, so it's actually better that they didn't try to waste their time making a bad broken system. Underneath all of this, the revert issue from Pro Skater 4 on the PS1 has finally been fixed. It took a long time to get there, but reverts now work properly 100% of the time instead of just 80% or 50%. They also made the aggro kick a little bit better. Instead of just using it for points right at the start of a combo, you can now chain it into the middle of a combo for more points. Beyond all of that, it just feels a lot better to play. It's a lot more clean and fluid than Skateland in the way that gameplay works. You can see how much work the team put in to make what they already had better. It's a sequel to a game that was developed for a brand new engine, and this is typical for sequels like that. Visually, this is a DS game. That means it looks like a PS1 game with less polygons, sort of. Impressively, this game actually does have a higher polygon count than Skateland, but just barely. It's almost on par with PS1 games. All of the models and textures look good, and much of it tries to be faithful to the PS3 counterpart, but Skateland did have one better visual choice than this game. The comic book art style of Skateland made all of the objects pop pop, which in turn would make the game easier to play because you could see it better. This game is a lot harder to look at because much of it is lacking any vibrance or outlines. To their credit, this is the most color vibrant version of this game, and it does look good, but it's not quite on par with American Skateland for visuals. At the end of everything, I feel comfortable giving Proving Ground for the DS a rating of 9 out of 10. This game is damn fun, and it's very faithful to the PS3 port. It's cut down a lot, yes, but as a fun and playable game, this is one of the best in the whole DS library, and really up there in the Pro Skater series. I would still recommend that you play the PS3 or Xbox 360 versions above this, but if you were a fan of American Skateland and you never played this, or if you're looking for some kind of handheld Tony Hawk that you can take with you and you happen to have a DS, it's definitely worth checking out. Generally, if you were a fan of the classic Pro Skater series, and you want something closer to that, but with a couple of new additions, this is definitely a game worth looking into. Vicarious Visions is awesome. Leo Zuniga is an S-tier lead designer, and this particular port of this game is pretty obscure. I would go so far as to call it a hidden gem because not nearly as many people have played it as they have Skateland or other games in the series. This was a good experience. I'm glad I played it, and I'm happy to end this video on a high note. If you completely ignore the PS2 and the Wii ports, Proving Ground is one of the best games in the series. Personally, it may be up there among some of the best games I've ever played. Now that I'm done with all of that, I can get back to a little bit of sanity. Smaller videos about smaller games that I can look at conveniently. You already know I've got Disney skateboarding games up on deck, and Krusty Demons and Freestyle Metal X are coming in the near future after that. I also want to get to the SSX and the Amped series sooner rather than later, and I should have a board to talk about Tony Hawk Ride and Shred at some point too. The list is huge, full of a ton of different games, and you guys suggest a ton that add to it all the time. I also find a lot on my own, so we're not in short supply. We'll keep the hype going for a little while. Until next time, thank you, and have a nice day.